Hey, Vanan, welcome back. This is quite interesting. I didn't expect to be back in this room again doing another podcast with you.
Yes.
How have you been?
I've been good. I've missed our listeners, but I'm really excited that we are back again, but with a different name.
Yeah. So welcome everyone to Majula Presents Local Politics.
Yeah.
We are back. As many of you know, back when we were doing the local dispatch, we were kind of a ragtag outfit. And it's been quite a while since we've been on air again. But in the last couple of months, people have reached out to us. They kind of miss our voice, surprisingly. And somebody in this room, our producer Marcus, thought it'd be a good idea to include our faces this time. So this is all kind of weird and surreal to us that we're back doing a politics podcast on Singapore.
Yeah. It's crazy, but also super interesting because this is a whole new podcast journey for us now, I think. It used to be just us rummaging about with not much idea of what's happening, but, I think we've decided to take this more seriously, or at least people have decided to take us more seriously. So
right.
Now we're surrounded by equipment and professionals, so we promise we'll do a much better job this season.
Yeah. So Vanan, I mean, it's been more than 2 years since we've done an episode that has been published. What's new with you? I hear you have a new job.
Yes. New job, new career, new professional targets.
Yeah.
I think what's maybe important for the people who are listening to us is, we have a new name and, it's a new kind of a setup production. But really, I think the ethos is still going to remain the same, right?
Well, we have a new producer too.
We have a new producer. And I think for us, we are restarting this series because we felt even the beginning when we started this podcast that part of the main reason why we wanted to do this is we felt there were a lot of information being spread around, passed around that may not necessarily be substantiated fairly or correctly.
Yeah. Look, I mean, it's no secret that politics-wise, this is 2024 has been an extraordinary year, and it will continue to be an extraordinary year. And the global ramifications and how it impacts Singapore, I think, are tremendous. And I do feel that there is still a little bit of space out there for people like us who, viewers or listeners might recall, both of us have policy wonks. I have a bit of exposure to the working levels within the government now, and you do too a little bit, and we have a lot more contact with governments around the world. So I think it's important to try and bring back a little bit of sense and sensibility to politics in Singapore, but also from the perspective of how the world will impact us as well.
Yeah, lots has changed since we last sat behind the mic. The Singapore people have a new leader in government.
Two new leaders in
government, that's true.
President and Prime Minister.
Yeah, interesting developments for Singapore. Yeah. Lots more elections that have happened across the world. Lots more that will happen across the world. Lots more conflict and crisis as well that's happened across the world. And like you said, it's important to understand that, but also to contextualize what that might mean for Singapore.
Yeah.
And with all of that in mind, I guess that's a very good introduction to a very light topic that we're going to talk about today.
There's one Middle Eastern territory that we were both very excited to be going to last year that we didn't end up going to, which is Palestine. And, we had some potential work there. Maybe you want to just fill in how that came about.
So it was an interesting time last year where we just started the business, and I wanted to bring you with me in one of my many trips to Palestine. As I'm sure we will remind the listeners shortly, but that was an eventful trip because we didn't end up going to Israel and Palestine. Yeah. It was also eventful because the flight that we had booked was for October 7th.
Yeah.
And in a way, I have to thank you because if you were not coming with me, I probably would have flown on October 5th and be stuck in some kind of an international crisis.
Well, I mean, maybe just a shout out to Member of Parliament Louis Ng, who saved us both because we were planning to leave on October 6th. And if we had done so, we would have landed in Tel Aviv as the first rockets fell at the airport. And, I was made to stay back one extra day for an event. Yeah. And so we were leaving October 7th. Our bags were packed. We were 3 hours from heading to the airport.
Oh, yeah.
And we get a call to say, something's up. And or you get a call to say something's up, and we're like, okay, maybe it's okay.
Yeah.
Then you get another call an hour later that said, maybe you get on the plane, see what happens in transit,
Yeah.
and then 30 minutes later, the trip is off, and weeks of preparation just down the drain.
Yeah.
But little did we know at that time how significant that moment was going to be for how global politics played out for the next year.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, in essence, what has transpired in the last 10 months has shocked me. It has devastated me in a lot of the sense. That area, that country is quite close to me. I've been there a few times, and for the listeners, most of my trips were mainly to do a bit of training, but also to be part of a lot of policy discussions and really spend my time with...
We did Vanan capacity building, right? There, I would say.
Yeah, I think that would be a fair kind of account.
Sure.
Really being part of the capacity upheaval and development of that area. I had a chance to really witness a lot of what we are reading right now in the papers. So for me, maybe a little bit more sanitized to these things. But nevertheless, still very much shocked by what's happening.
And to be clear, you never went to Gaza, right? You were, so I think many listeners may be a bit confused. So the territories of Palestine are split into two. So ironically, on the east side, you have the West Bank. Yeah. It's called the West Bank because it's the west bank of a river.
Yeah.
And then on the west side is Gaza. And in between Gaza and the West Bank, you have, the country of Israel, basically, right?
Yeah.
And so you've never been to Gaza, but you've been to Palestine a few times. And because I think the events of October 7 have been so impactful around the world, we wanted to, I guess, dedicate this first episode looking at how that situation has escalated. And now it's, almost 10 months since. It's August 2024. And we are living in a week where we just came back from a Muslim majority country where so much has happened in the Middle East and a lot of things that we had felt, even just being in a country like Pakistan last week. And the reverberations of, what has happened since October 7th that's escalated to last week, we still haven't seen the end of, right?
Yeah, I think to be fair, this has not only been a 10-month crisis, but a really complicated one for anyone who wants to follow this crisis. A lot has happened in a short period of 10 months. There's been a lot of actors with a lot of different ambitions and goals and targets and a lot of status quo developments that might be hard to track. I wanted to say before we, get down into discussing, what has happened between Israel, Palestine, West Bank, Gaza. When we are discussing the situation in the Middle East, it's not only in Israel and Palestine that there are unprecedented levels of attacks.
Yeah.
What's happening in Sudan, the civil war, has claimed a lot of lives and has displaced millions and millions of people. In Iraq, the situation is still very much uncertain. What's happening in Yemen and the issues that have plagued the Red Sea and its effect and impact on the inflationary pressures that we have seen and a lot of the shipping routes. All of those are on its own big challenges that the region is facing. So it wouldn't be fair to not even at least mention that there's much more that's happening around the Middle East than what is happening just in Israel and Palestine. But for today, let's just focus on what we think are pretty important, significant milestones that have happened and how that maybe affects Singapore.
And I think, before we get into the weeds of things, we discussed beforehand. And one of the things we want to make clear is, when we are discussing this conflict, it's very important that we separate what is Hamas and what is Palestine. And we also think it's very important to separate what is the state of Israel with Jewish people. Because I think very often from an emotional point of view, these things get tangled up a lot. And at the end of the day, whether you're Palestinian, whether you're Jewish, you're just, people, right?
Yeah.
And the actions of the state, or in Hamas's case, Hamas is not a state, but and I think you would definitely bring that up again. But the actions of the state or the actions of actors, they're not representative of what the people are. So I think we need to make that clear. But at the end of the day, people, it is these people, regular people, who are suffering the most, especially in Gaza right now. You've been quite up close to some of these settlements in your travels to the West Bank. I mean, for the listeners and I guess now the viewers, what, like being very close to one, like if you're in an olive farm in Palestine and there's a settlement like down the road, what is it like?
It's strange. I mean, for me, it was I didn't have the kind of impact that an average Palestinian would have, right?
Of course.
Because I'm just visiting and I'm just seeing it with my eyes. So even as I'm driving, I realized in the beginning that we can't take the most obvious road to another town.
Right.
We have to go through, if a journey would take 10, 15 minutes and you can see where you're going, chances are the journey would take us 45 minutes because an entire part of the highway would be portioned off for a settlement.
Right.
So imagine you're going through a road and then just a big kind of artificial city is in the center of the road. So you would have to make at least 2 circumferences around that to reach your destination. So that's one way of maybe imagining it.
Right.
Another way is if you think of the Berlin Wall, you know, the concrete slabs around you. All of that is not only now on the outside of the city, but also within the city, within small areas within the city.
Like in Hebron, right?
Like in Hebron, where you could be walking in the market and 1/3 of the market might just be siphoned off.
So Hebron is a city in the West Bank that is incredibly controlled by Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is it? It's basically street by street. There are checkpoints, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's quite a number of checkpoints right now in Hebron. There are cameras everywhere, but there's also an automated gun.
There are cameras everywhere in Singapore.
Yeah, true. But there's also an automated machine gun.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of reports and incidences of settlers just throwing bottles onto people walking below. So it's very much in the face of your day-to-day living. But this is very different to the situation in Gaza, right? Because Hamas, which is the official elected governance structure of...
Sort of. Well, they were elected, but I mean, there hasn't been an election in over 10 years.
True. I'm glad you made that point because these are the kind of issues that we are dealing with when we try to understand what's been happening in the last 10 months. Yeah. Hamas has been elected more than 10 years ago. Generally, if you look at the sentiments on the ground in the West Bank, people say that they do not speak up for their rights anymore. They are much more radicalized than they have ever been before. And most of the times, maybe their interests no longer align with the interests of the people who are suffering in Gaza. This is very different to the West Bank, where there's much more administrative capacity.
Right.
But in general, I think what's very important and what's important to contextualize here is the issue started with Hamas, and that's what Israel has said was the main source for their response, their heavy response into Gaza. But the number of deaths in the West Bank has increased by a significant margin since then.
So I mean, if you think that Hamas has become a lot more radicalized in the last 10 years and very far away from its original mandate 10 years ago, we also know that from I guess some sources that the Israeli government has made it a priority to prop up Hamas. They funded Hamas through, not directly, but through some informal channels. There's New York Times reporting on that. So on one hand, there has been money funded to Hamas to become more radicalized. And then October 7th happens, right? Against the, is there a link there where, the funding and the radicalization of Hamas, do you think has led to October 7th happening?
I think there might be elements of truth to that. But once again, it is a very complex issue, right? Israel has funded in some aspects certain parts of Hamas. Hamas is not only a radicalized organization, it's also a governance, it's also a political party. It also exists in schools as a form of discussion. I think Israel did its funding in its aim to find peace. But at the same time, because the issue is very complicated and complex, Hamas is also funded by a lot of other organizations that are internationally registered as terrorist organizations. Hamas also has been documented as receiving a lot of money and funding from Palestinian diaspora. At the same time, I guess one of the issues leading to what has happened on October 7th is the general unhappiness and displeasure of the people that have been boiling for years, or at least that's what Hamas has said. But if you notice, the situation in Israel has also become more conservative.
Yeah.
The strength of Netanyahu's government had also been considerably weaker.
Right.
Because of the political uncertainties that were leading up to October 7th as well.
Yeah, I mean, Israel and Saudi Arabia were about to sign a formal relationship.
Yeah.
And that has not happened.
I think there are a lot of factors that has led to October 7th, right?
Yeah.
But I think the point that we are maybe trying to make here is that it's a long drawn-out affair.
Yeah. Okay.
Seeing it from just October 6th or even October wouldn't do it justice. But it's also important to understand that there's a difference in what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank.
Yeah.
But also, there are a lot of other actors at play, which I think we'll talk about a little bit now, right?
So, let's get into that. Things have been escalating, and sometimes Gaza is in the news more, sometimes it's in the news less. But about 10 days ago, there was a attack in a part of Israel called the Golan Heights.
Yeah.
And that attack ended up killing, I think over 10 children and 12 people, something like that.
Yeah.
Quite a horrific attack. And nobody has claimed responsibility for the attack, but Israel has made it very clear that they think that Hezbollah is to blame. And that's another stakeholder that we haven't talked about yet, because I don't know anything about them.
Yeah.
But in retaliation of those attacks in the Golan Heights, Israel has acted pretty swiftly. And, last Tuesday, they sent a drone strike and assassinated the head of Hezbollah in Beirut, a guy by the name of Fuad Shakir.
Yeah.
And he was the head of Beirut. He was the head of Hezbollah in Beirut. And 12 hours later, there was this insane kind of like super spy assassination in Tehran, the capital of Iran, where the political leader of Hamas, who is based in Doha, he was in Tehran visiting for the inauguration of the new prime minister of Iran.
Yeah.
And he was assassinated by, allegedly, we don't know what happened, but the story now is that explosive device was sneaked into a guest house in Tehran, and he was blown up there too. And why this is important is, why I think this is interesting for many reasons, but so obviously that has really blown up the situation with Hezbollah, blown up the situation with Iran. And the leader of Hamas, who was assassinated in Tehran, was a principal negotiator living in Doha to try and find peace for the solution for the current war. Yeah. So, the obvious logical kind of statement to make here is that if you are actively trying to look for peace, you're not going to kill one of the lead negotiators for peace.
Yeah. It's also important to note that he was assassinated along with his bodyguard.
Yeah.
But more importantly, I suppose, is that when the whole world, including Israel and the US and generally the West, were looking at Hamas as a radicalized organization that only focused on the destruction and elimination of Israel, this particular guy wasn't seen as an extremist within Hamas.
Yeah. His name is Ismail Haniyeh, lived in Doha with his family.
Yeah, he actually had contributed a lot to the peace conversation and to try and find a truce deal. He was also one of the people who believed in the, I think, two-state solution.
Yeah.
His parents were part of the initially displaced people in 1948, and he had also been a refugee in the past. So I think a lot of people in Gaza saw him as someone who was more reflective of the day-to-day struggles that they had been going through. So
basically Hamas is not one thing either, right? You have extremist sides of it. You also have, I guess, less extremist sides. Look, so I think that's a good primer on the situation right now. Maybe let's just take a break and then we can come back and talk about the impact on Singapore.
Yeah, sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. How was your break?
My break was great.
Look, let's bring this discussion back to Singapore because I think the impact of what's happening over there has a significant impact to Singapore. Not because we are incredibly tied to Palestine and well, we are tied to Israel in some way, but we're not incredibly tied to the Middle East at the moment. But looking at where we are geographically, with Malaysia to the north, and objectively, Malaysia is becoming a more conservative society. If you look at what's happening on the west coast of Malaysia, not West Malaysia, but the west coast of Malaysia, especially the northern west coast, the current opposition party PAS, which is a Muslim fundamentalist party, has taken over a lot of states. And in the south, we have Indonesia, the world's biggest Muslim country. 300 million Muslims living there. Not as not as fundamental as other parts of the world, but it's a very large majority with a very diverse practice of Islam. Singapore is in the middle. And aside from the obvious kind of like global economic ramifications that this impact is having economically, the Dow Jones and the markets have kind of crashed since the assassination of the two, Hamas and Hezbollah leaders. But also closer to home, I think there are two big kind of impacts. And I think we're going to try and talk about them from a policy angle. So for me, I'm going to look at it from a security perspective, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is a very important thing to look at because ASEAN has always been a hotbed of, terrorism as well. Maybe not to the extent that you would have in Afghanistan or in Syria, but we've had JI here, we have had IS here. And I'm not an expert in these fields, but if you just look at the reporting again in Malaysia, just this year, there's been a significant uptick in terrorism activity, right? In May, there was an attack on a police station in Johor.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and that was credited to Jemaah Islam. And in June, according to some reports, 75 people in Malaysia were arrested for links to IS, Islamic State, right? Which still, doesn't have its caliphate anymore, but still exists, in these kind of micro splinter cells that, are self kind of radicalized. Now, I think this is very significant because in Singapore, we share a land border crossing.
Yeah.
The types of terrorist activities that are happening in Malaysia are, very isolated. So you have a lot of sole actors or small actors.
Yeah.
It is not unfathomable to think that they will come over to Singapore because we do have a sizable Jewish population, a very kind of progressive Jewish population, very worldly Jewish population, not Israeli population, but Jewish population.
Yeah.
And it's not unfathomable that a lone actor could come here and conduct acts of terrorism against them. And, that's not unfathomable either because in 2021, a young Singaporean was actually detained under the Internal Security Act for planning an attack on the against Jewish people in Singapore.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
So I think this is something that we need to start thinking about from a home perspective, right? And to be fair, when the Israel government tried to sort of interfere in our own politics when they put up that post about Singapore being a bad friend for supporting Palestine, Minister Shanmugam immediately spoke up, right, and condemned that kind of act too. I think, that has been a very important kind of factor in keeping kind of the stability and peace here.
Yeah, I think that's very important, and I think it's right that you pointed that out because, for me as a Singaporean, watching how the Singapore government has dealt with this has been, I would say, quite impressive. Both from an internal perspective. So if you look at the ruling party, PAP, along with the opposition parties who are in parliament, they've had discussions and a lot of questions were put up in parliament about this. But I think in general, they reached consensus that they are going to be siding with, they reached consensus on what the right action should be.
Yeah.
And I think that's not something that most countries can say, actually, right?
Right.
If you look at the US, a lot of how President Biden and his government had dealt with the issue in Israel-Palestine led to a lot of dip in his polls. At the same time, there's been a lot of disinformation and misinformation kind of discussed by the political parties within the US. Yeah. In the UK, in the recent election, a lot of splintered candidates left the Labour Party, and the issues of Israel and Palestine appeared on the ballot for them, right? So actually, I'm quite grateful that internally, domestically in our politics, there's a bit of calmness and I guess that leads to a bit of security too.
Well, I mean, when we were traveling last week, we heard from someone that we know who has a bit more in-depth knowledge about the security concerns in this region, and I was quite surprised to hear that there is a concern that there would be an uptick in violent activities here. And I think that from a Singapore perspective, even though you say, and I agree with you, that the Singapore government has taken all the right steps to support Palestinian people, just because we've taken the right steps doesn't mean that we are immune from being attacked, right? Because the perceptions on the ground in Malaysia, or the perceptions on the ground in other parts of ASEAN are definitely well beyond our control. So from a public policy perspective, there's actually not a lot we can do to prevent or totally wipe out the risk of security incidents happening here.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's a natural guard against being complacent. And I think your point is actually very valid. I think there are a lot of people out there, including our producer, who might feel like, if you're a small state, why get involved in the first place?
Right.
And actually, there might be a lot of truth to that. But maybe it's also important that we're at least kept abreast of what's happening, right? I think in Singapore's actions, it's not just about underscoring the importance for the Palestinians to have dignity and a home, but it's also, in terms of the recognition of the state of Israel means that our foreign affairs minister can fly over there and give aid, cash and humanitarian aid as well
to Palestine.
To Palestine.
Yeah.
And actually, if you start to unpack some of this quite clearly, Palestine doesn't have an airport. Maybe many people do not know that.
Yes.
So
Yes.
for a lot of the aid, a lot of the assistance to come to Palestine, it has to be funneled through either Israel or Egypt, right? And if you do not recognize Israel, like some of the countries out there in the world might do, it's very difficult to then bring and give humanitarian aid, even if you are going to support the cause for Palestine. So in that sense, you also have to be strategic in the way you have diplomatic efforts to provide aid for Palestinians.
Okay. I think that's a very important nuance that people don't understand, because on the social side of things in Singapore, there have been some, I guess, local movements that have called for Singapore to be more, I guess, stand a bit harder against Israel. There have been, for example, like marches which is quite funny to me, from Plaza Singapore to the Istana to deliver letters, right? And
it's very Singapore, isn't it?
It's very Singapore. And asking for us to stop business dealings with Israel, to stop even recognizing Israel in some way. So what you speak to actually is an important nuance, right? Which is that if you want to be able to continue engaging in the region and being, I guess, focal point for trying to not be the resolver of the issue, but trying to give aid and support, cutting out an entire side of the conflict could be actually detrimental to what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think if you're someone in Singapore, there's a need to recognize and be consistent in the messaging that you're talking about, the social unrest. Right. I remember when we interviewed Ambassador Katerina Zelenko on our podcast.
Our previous podcast.
On our previous podcast. Yeah. Singapore
Ambassador for Ukraine in Singapore.
That's right. Singapore was one of the first ones to acknowledge the issues that was happening between Russia and Ukraine, and I think Singapore has remained kind of consistent in that front, recognizing the issues and the problems that are going with the wars that are taking place. In that sense, from a Singaporean point of view, from a social viewpoint, from a resident point of view, I suppose, seeing that level of consistency is also a good reminder that the government is on the right track, or at least it's consistent in the way it's delivering its kind of verdict on these issues. Right. I look at, that I check into the UK politics and the situation in the UK quite closely.
Right.
And in the last 72 hours, what has been happening has been quite shocking and quite saddening. For those who don't know, what turned out to be an attack on 3 innocent girls in a small town in the UK through what can only be described as levels of disinformation and misinformation. A 17-year-old boy had stabbed them to death because he was underage, below the age of 18. The police could not reveal his identity or name the suspect.
Right.
That led to a lot of misinformation from far-right activists that this was a refugee and this was a Muslim who had killed these women. These were all proven to be false because the courts had to intervene. And they had to release his name because of the
They did in the end.
Huge racial riots that were happening. I mean, there were instances where mobs turned to attack Muslim-looking people in streets and in cars and in walkways. Now, these are the kind of social unrest that could just happen in 72 hours.
Yeah.
Right? And it's a good reminder for us that we shouldn't take this very lightly. So many of our leaders even from our president and from our previous leaders have said that an important part of the reasons why we are successful is our social fabric.
Right.
And, ensuring that we are consistent and we are being reminded that standing up for the right causes is as important as maintaining racial and, racial harmony and security, I suppose.
Yeah. I think, you made a good point, right? Which is that what is happening in the UK right now, there's a lot of other reasons why the UK is a bit screwed up at the moment, but this impact of like refugees in the UK and this fear of this right wing, I guess, kind of this right wing focus on the role of refugees in why UK is not doing well, makes it very easy for social unrest to happen and go haywire quite quickly. Whereas here in Singapore, we are, I guess, in some ways as diverse as the UK, maybe in some ways more, some ways less, but 15% of our population are still Malay Muslims, and many of them have close ties to our neighboring countries. And there is, regardless of what you say, what's happening in Palestine is horrific scenes, and seeing that being played out to civilians would move anyone's heart. But on the other side, you have right-wing people in Singapore as well who are very supportive of the Israeli state in their actions, and not having the right rail guards in place, like POFMA, which is the Protection of Online Falsehood Act, to kind of nip these falsehoods in the bud quickly, could result in Singapore, having similar issues that we're seeing in the UK right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things that, as I think about what you're talking about, is the importance of our social fabric, right? It's all interconnected, because if you think of what's happening in Israel, as soon as they got the attack, they mobilized their reservist force. Now, in Singapore, mandatory to serve, national service. And we have a reservist force. Our first ones were trained by Israel. And a lot of our reservist force, if we are ever under kind of state of attack, would involve soldiers, unlike Israel, who are basically all Israeli, of different faith. And it's important to acknowledge, respect each other's faith, because we literally are as strong as our weakest link, right, in this country. And at the same time, our military defense, our total defense, and the way we are being portrayed and viewed by other countries also takes a hit, I guess. So in that sense, public policy and the way we view security in Singapore, it's all kind of embedded within the social fabric, I think.
Yeah, because we were going to talk about this from two angles, right? The security angle and the social angle. Yeah. But maybe they're actually the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Social defense is one of the defenses here in Singapore.
Yeah, exactly. And at the same time, we look at it internally, but externally, the situation in Israel and Palestine, people might think that the crisis that is happening in Europe and the US right now with the influx of immigration, which has led to a lot of the widespread concerns on domestic security, is actually not really true. If you look at a lot of the statistics released by the UN agencies, the number of refugees who are entering Europe is not actually directly by the war or from the war that is happening between Israel and Palestine. A lot of the people don't want to go to the West because they see the West as supporting Israel.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of false informations and false pejoratives that are being played out. And so having this kind of safeguards in place makes sure that in Singapore, at least the information that we are consuming is almost somewhat accurate. Importantly as well, the Israel-Palestinian conflict, unlike the numerous Israel-Palestinian conflicts, is being really played out in different kinds of social media platforms. Right? I think in Singapore, they have said that there's been an increase in the overall viewership of some of these videos, either in TikTok or in different platforms. When this happens, the propensity for people to be radicalized by seeing a lot of these images is also higher. And I think most of the ministry's efforts, and even some of our ministers have said, it is getting harder and harder to see how many of these people are actually being radicalized as before. So I think we have to take these things very seriously. We have to check and make sure that the kind of information that Singaporeans are getting are also accurate. But it's hard without any independent third-party kind of verification from the source.
Look, Ben, this has been a pretty heavy topic. And I think that if we knew how to solve it, definitely wouldn't be doing a podcast about it. And I think, what is special about, for me, what's been special about starting this up again with this topic is that, it is an ongoing conflict that actually we've been, I guess, not a part of, but almost became a part of. And I think, having traveled so much to these regions and then coming back to Singapore after our travels, I really feel the significance of how the social fabric that you talk about has played a part, right? When I come back to Singapore, and when we talk about Singapore when we go overseas, people always ask us, even when we were out of the country last week, they're like, oh, you Vanan, you don't look like a typical Singaporean would look, or Daniel, you don't look like a typical Singaporean, which from the outside is true, but every time we come back to Singapore, everyone knows, like, it doesn't really matter what you look like. You may have an Indian identity or a Chinese identity, but I really kind of cherish this more now than I did about a year and a half ago, that we can be Singapore first. And actually, it's a big privilege when we tell people about it overseas.
Yeah. Look, for me, it's close to my heart. All the people that I met in Palestine, I hope they're keeping safe.
Yeah.
I try to check in with them, but I hope the situation reaches a natural end. When I lived in the UK, there's a place in the UK called Muswell Hill where there's a huge Jewish population and Palestinian population, and they live happily surrounded by numerous fantastic Jewish bakeries. Yeah. And in the US, I've heard from my friends that Palestinians and Israelis are friends. And I hope that Singapore can continue to be a state where we don't really see or prioritize these differences, but allow them to be more harmonized. So I hope that happens. I hope Singapore, remains in that vein and that form. And let's just hope there's an end to the conflict. I'm really glad we started this podcast back up again. I know it's a heavy topic that we start with, but we don't choose. We just talk about what's important, and we'll continue to do so in the next upcoming episodes.
So look, I mean, a lot of stuff coming up Singapore-wise in the next couple of months. GE is coming at some point. Definitely there'll be a big run up to that. In the next few weeks, National Day. We have DPM Wong's first National Day address. What? Oh my gosh, no. We have a Prime Minister.
Did you say DPM Wong, Dan? Do you think
Marcus,
someone else should be Prime Minister?
We have PM Wong's first National Day rally in a few weeks. I'll be there, and I'll come back on the pod to tell you what it was all about. I'll be there in person. Thank you very much.
You can tell he's excited because he's shouting on the mic.
Yeah. Lots of... wow, you put me in a difficult position. Thank you very much. See you soon, guys.
Well, thank you very much for listening to the podcast. If you liked it or enjoyed it, do share around with your friends, and hope we can continue to take up a small space in your comfortable living room. Yeah. We are Local Politics.
Bye.